Family Medicine in Pittsburgh. My chair knew that she was coming and said, "Hey, I need to introduce you to this person." I interviewed for the job here in Pittsburgh at her house in Maryland. And she sold me with, "We're going to go and we're going to this health center in the Hill District. We're going to care for this community and, do all the things that I wanted to do." And it was all just laid out for me. And so that's how I got back to Pittsburgh.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And so so I want to kind of be able to kind of get us to where you are now and how just how did you get to where you are now?
Mhm.
And then what, like, basically what drove you into where you are now?
Yeah. So when I first came to Pittsburgh, again, it was that pursuit of academic medicine. So teaching as well as practicing, and being an example to students coming behind me. And so that was up something that I definitely wanted to do. So that opportunity to do that, to be able to work in the Hill District and really be able to serve the community and have Black faces serving Black patients was just amazing. But I did want to expand a little bit, and so that's why I went out to the UPMC McKeesport. They actually had a residency program, and so I wanted to kind of do what Dr. Stewart, who's the physician that I worked with, did, and be an example for residents as they're training to be able to see what does kindness look like, what does caring for communities look like as you're doing this residency. And so moved from the Hill District to McKeesport. I've been practicing in McKeesport since about 2003, and have just done the progression of things there. So started out as a director of research, and then became clinical director and then the associate program director, and now I'm the program director, and I've been in that role for about the past 10 years.
That's phenomenal. And there's a reason for this conversation and me asking her these questions. One of the to give the viewers and those that are listening the confidence and the background knowledge of Dr. Conti when we begin to kind of talk about the vaccine. I think it's a needed thing, needed and necessary for us to oftentimes validate and understand people's background, especially who's giving really life changing and it can be life altering information. And so, with that, we understand that she's well experienced. She has done the necessity. You did not, get your degree offline. You didn't pay for it.
It wasn't a Pop Tart degree.
Yeah, it
No, no,
wasn't.
this was worked for.
It wasn't one of those things. And so, for that, I'm thankful that you would take the time to kind of share and kind of talk about the vaccine. And so let's kind of go there.
Yeah.
COVID-19 has drastically changed and caused so much to change in our communities and even change in our lives. And so, to move a little forward, we've all recognized that we're a little more than a year in, and now within a year, they came up with some vaccines. And these vaccines are supposed to help us to function and to live a little more comfortable in the space, knowing that COVID is still existing, COVID is still out here, and we don't know when COVID is going to be gone. So, um, tell us, give us some insight as it relates to your experience, the necessity. Is it worth it?
Absolutely. And I think to really talk about why it's worth it, we have to go back to the beginning. And so, one of the things I didn't share is I also serve as the executive vice chair in the Department of Family Medicine. Um, what that did was allow me access into different viewpoints and really getting to see other things outside of just family medicine. Um, when the coronavirus and COVID 19 first came on board, and you saw what this was doing in other countries, and then you saw what it was starting to do here in the US, we knew that it was devastating to our communities, right? We saw us dying more. We saw us being hospitalized more. And we really needed to do something so that we could stop this or try to mitigate those effects here in Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
I always say that Pittsburgh gets things a little late, right? And so we
Yeah.
don't get trends when they first come. We're always, and so we had some time to really try to look at this. And so there were a group of politicians, then legislators, that brought together some researchers, some the health systems to talk about what can we do in our communities, how can we get this information out there. And so I got invited to be a part of the Black Equity Coalition, and this is a group of philanthropists, researchers, scientists, physicians, whose main goal is to try to educate our communities and improve health disparities and really look at health from a broader perspective.
Okay.
And so that group, we since the pandemic began, we've been meeting monthly, monthly, weekly, sometimes more than twice a week, because we started out as a huddle group, and then we broke off and developed, a data exchange group, a community health group, a legislative group, really trying to focus on our federally qualified health centers, because when you looked at where Black people live in Pittsburgh, there are certain neighborhoods, right? We know the historical causes
Yeah.
of that, and then
Mm-hmm.
we know that that's just what it is. And so when you saw where testing was, it was not in our neighborhoods. And so, but if you look at the federally qualified health centers, their whole mission is to serve communities of color, to serve populations. And so we talked about getting testing into the FQHCs so that there would be testing available immediately for patients, that they didn't have to travel. And then that led to other organizations being able to do testing like yours, right?
Yeah.
But we also knew that it was going to be important to talk about what this disease is and what it does and what we needed in our communities to keep us safe. If you think about what we do, a lot of our communities serve as essential workers. And so when everybody with these high level executive jobs were able to shelter in place and work from home, we still had to go out, right?
Absolutely.
We were still
Mm-hmm.
getting exposed. And so it's no wonder why we were um, obtaining COVID more, why we were, because we were getting exposed
Yeah.
more. And so, but if you looked at the testing rates, those testing rates were lower. And so we needed to make sure that if our essential workers were needed to go out and expose themselves, that we also needed to make sure that they were being tested. We wanted to make sure that we were looking at why our patients were dying and making sure that there was equal treatment when they were in the hospitals. And so being able to sit in places to look at the protocols and see that they were being fair and ensuring that our people were getting the treatments that were necessary was something that I just was blessed and privileged to be able to do, which leads to vaccines, because now we have this thing that can help us, and we know that it prevents death, and that's the biggest thing about it. So a couple of things that you had said, this seems like it came out really fast, and it was this new vaccine. So the research behind coronavirus vaccines actually started with H1N1 and previous. So there was already some background research. They talked about this new vaccine called the mRNA vaccine, which the Pfizer and the Moderna are. That research had started before COVID 19. And so you had researchers that had some background information. Some of the difficulty when you talk about research and why it typically takes so long is because of funding. Well, with coronavirus, because it was impacting our community so much and the country so much, they took off some of the red tape that usually exists. Not the safety protocols; those were all in place. It was just the bureaucracy. Did I say that right?
Yeah.
And so you take away the bureaucracy, but you also flood the market with money that allows you to develop things at a much quicker rate than normal. And so it's not that this was rushed through, it's just that researchers had the opportunity, they had the money to do it.
So basically, the Moderna and the Pfizer, um, they were already had some knowledge and already began their research, not specific to COVID, but strands or things that were very similar to it.
Mhm.
And the only and the reason in which we see the fast turnaround is because now people are, because of the importance and the high level, so to speak, people begin to fund it,
Yes.
right? And so, okay, that makes sense. It makes sense to me.
Right.
Um, but even with it being funded, I guess the question would be, how or even where does this background knowledge from begin to start with Moderna and Pfizer and other researchers? We know that we've kind of gone through other scenarios and other what do we want to call it,
Experiment.
experiments and viruses that
Mhm.
have affected us greatly.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so where does that just begin? And like there's like people right now, are there people right now that are like doing research on like the next big thing?
Yeah, so there is constantly research going on from, cancer therapies and cancer treatments, and there are new things going on all the time and new therapies that are being instituted, but people just don't hear about it. And I think when the flags go up is because COVID affected so many people, and it was so and the need to be transparent was there. You saw it a lot, it also created a lot of doubt, right?
Yeah.
Um, when you think about, some rare cancers, there's a lot of go through experimental procedures and experimental things to help them get better. This does have an emergency use authorization, but what that does is it says that there are safety mechanisms in place. And even though we're giving you this on the emergency level, we're still going to watch it. We're still going to do what is necessary to make sure patients are safe. And I think that's a key point to know, because people relate this back to, Tuskegee. Those safety mechanisms were not there.
Okay.
Right, there was no one really watching, and now you have so many multiple layers of what you would call watchdogs for all research, that no one can take those shortcuts, no one can do something that does not benefit somebody's well-being.
So, and this is just a question that comes to mind for me. No one asked this. There are a few questions that we'll get into, but what comes to mind is this question. So, knowing that there are organizations or people who are doing their work, such as Pfizer and Moderna. And the great thing is we have Moderna, guys. That's what we are providing on Saturday. Um, so how does, and we don't have to speak too much about it. Just from my own background knowledge, and this is not to shade or to, but how does someone such as like a Johnson and Johnson have the ability or the capacity, and not knowing, I don't know anything about how long they were doing research, so on and so forth, but how does someone such as their organization have the capacity to jump into the same kind of boat, so to speak, as a Moderna or a Pfizer?
Yeah. So Johnson and Johnson has been doing research, right? So
Okay.
that they're not a new researcher. They just had a different type of vaccine, and there are so many different pharmaceutical companies that do research on medications, on products. Everything that we use has an FDA label on it. That means somebody did some type of research on it. Somebody studied it. Somebody said that this is okay for the general public. And a little bit about the Johnson and Johnson vaccine, because I think that creates a lot of hesitancy.
Yeah.
But I think that that's an example of the system working, right? When you look at the overall numbers and think about the risk, the actual risk of blood clots from Johnson and Johnson is less than the risk of blood clots in just the general population. Right.
Okay.
If you compare the risk of blood clots when if somebody who smokes, that's like 3 times the amount of, if you smoke, you're putting yourself at a greater amount than you would with the Johnson and Johnson. And so even with the very, very small numbers, because of the safety mechanisms were in place, they were able to say, you know what? Wait, let's take a pause on this. Let's look at this more. One, to see is there anything that we're missing? Two, to see should we be making recommendations about who should get the Johnson and Johnson, and also to allow physicians to get more knowledge about what to look for in with regards to side effects. So that shows me that this is what they said is working, right? The safety mechanisms were in place, and those safety mechanisms also allowed them to go back on the market. However, with the knowledge that there are certain populations that are going to be more at risk, and so we should be more educated. That happens with any medication. We know that there have been medications that have been out on the market for years. Take, for example, Zantac. That was over the counter, but it was over only after a certain amount of time with so many people using it that we start seeing some of those side effects. And again, the safety mechanisms are in place to allow us to make educated decisions at the time that knowledge is presented.
That's awesome. So not only is it working, but it also shows for something like a Johnson and Johnson that the government and the powers to be are doing their job with paying attention
Hmm.
to the risks and the side effects that these vaccines are causing to help slow down the fears,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? Because again, we are even culturally, anytime, and if we're just honest, anytime anything is produced and that has to be put into our bodies, we have negative connotations.
Hmm.
I was talking to someone a few days ago, and they were just like, I think this is the mark of the beast. And I was just like,
That's not what the Bible said.
I said, and I said, and just yesterday, my brother and I were talking, and I was just like, yeah, that's not the context of like the mark of the beast, right? And I think from different perspectives, and that's not to downplay, anyone's kind of thought process, but just even from a traditional sense, that's somewhat how our minds were trained and are trained to think.
Hmm. Hmm.
Whereas, getting knowledge and getting understanding of these things and getting the background information. And the truth of the matter is, for many of us, we never had people on the back end of things, right?
Hmm.
We've never had, some of us don't have doctors in our families that can tell us and really give us the information that's going on behind in the dark room,
Right.
right? To say, hey, you're a doctor. Should we really take this, or should we? What are your thoughts and your process? And so we lean to voices in our community and those that we are giving. That has influence, so to speak, and hoping that they are hoping and praying, not just hoping, but hoping and praying that they are leading us in such a way that causes life and life more abundantly,
Yeah.
right? And so one of the questions that was raised was, which vaccine is the preferred vaccine?
The one that you can get. I mean, honestly, they all function very well with, and when I say function very well, these are what this is what I'm talking about. So the whole goal of vaccine is to prevent serious illness, which is hospitalizations or intubation, as well as the most serious complication, death. And all of the vaccines that have been approved do that. Now, are there certain considerations? So, if you are 16 and 17, there's only one vaccine that you can get, and that's Pfizer.
Okay.
And so that's just if you're under the age of 18 and you meet the criteria, which is really those two ages, 16 and 17. For now, it's Pfizer. They're looking at expanding that age group, and so some of it will be what your age is. When you look at, I know there was a lot of discussion about the efficacy and the differences in the efficacy. You can only do that if there is a head-to-head comparison at the same time for each of these drugs, and that was not done. Each drug was studied on its own at the time that it was, being developed. And so, if you go back to when Pfizer and Moderna was studied, the cases in the US weren't as high, right? And so there was not as much exposure. Now, over time, they continue to study them and they still continue with those same efficacy rates. But when you think about Johnson and Johnson, it was actually introduced in the height of the pandemic. And so there was just more coronavirus. And so you can't really say that it works less than the Pfizer or Moderna because they just weren't studied like that. They only study vaccines within themselves. Now, I can say, when it comes to somebody with at risk for clotting disorder, or if you are a woman between the age of 18 and 40, I would really have a conversation with your doctor to see if Johnson and Johnson is the right vaccine for you. Just had a patient who I've been taking care of for a long time. And during one of her pregnancies, she actually had a blood clot. I told her I would not recommend Johnson and Johnson for her just because of her specific, you know, situation.
Right.
If if she did not have that and she was in a different age group, I have no problem with Johnson and Johnson. It's still a very safe vaccine. There is a very very small side effect of blood clots though.
And so how do we, because again, we know that we live in a society that the media essentially controls our thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And so with the media controlling our thinking, with them controlling our feelings as well concerning vaccines, concerning just in general, um, so even what you say about Johnson and Johnson, you look at that from more of a academic or even a researcher standpoint,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
When you begin to kind of think of numbers, but for the general person, you're not going to think of like the research and the number of people versus the number of people that have taken Pfizer versus the number of people that have taken Moderna, like all of these different dynamics that are comparison. But what we hear becomes what we begin to become afraid of,
Right.
right? And so, from that standpoint, how would you recommend or suggest a person that is interested, knowing that each vaccine has different side effects? Well, they all have side effects, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
but some of them have had more side effects in particular areas than others, such as Johnson and Johnson with blood clot.
Mm-hmm.
How do you recommend a person to almost get a consultation as to what vaccine to take or what vaccine that may be good for their body?
Yeah. So I am a family physician, and primary care is what I'm passionate about. I think prevention and relationship with your physician goes a long way towards a healthy life. And so talking to your provider, your physician about your concerns and having a transparent conversation. And if you don't have that, going to a trusted individual, your clergy, somebody who has some knowledge, who is able to speak to you and not speak to you through social media or through some of the other media veins, and doesn't politicize this vaccine. I think that's the other issue with COVID. It was used as a political tool, right?
Yeah.
And so taking away that barrier and really trying to get to the heart of it. This virus kills people, and our goal is for it not to.
So the a question would be: has anyone that have taken the vaccine, has there been any noted deaths from the vaccine itself?
Yeah, no noted deaths from the vaccine itself.
Okay, good to know. Are these vaccines effective against other strands?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And it was difficult to say for Moderna and Pfizer because, again, remember, they were tested early on, as I said. And so the cases of the variant strains weren't out there. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine was studied in the middle of that, and so we know that it worked very well. Over time, they have been able to see that yes, Moderna and Pfizer are effective against some of those variant strains as well. You also have to think of where they were studied. It wasn't just in the US where they were studied, there were multiple countries they were being studied at, each with different variants. And so across the world, these vaccines were safe, effective, and work.
Awesome. Um, are the vaccines are these vaccines one and done, or will there be annual vaccines like the flu vaccines?
Yeah. So hard question to know because it's over time. And I give the example of the whooping cough, right? If you had received vaccinations when you were a child, you got the pertussis that was part of your childhood vaccination series. And they usually combine that with a tetanus vaccine. So as a child, it was called the DTaP. So it had tetanus and it had pertussis. Once you became an adult, you only really got boosters to the tetanus part of it, and that was the TD. Over time, we saw that adults were starting to get whooping cough, and that
Okay.
was becoming more prevalent. And so, a couple of years ago, the decision was made that every adult should get at least a booster of the pertussis. And so now there's an adult Tdap, which really covers for tetanus and pertussis again. The same thing is going to happen with COVID. They continue to check to make sure that the immunity to the corona is there. And as they go along, they will see and make recommendations for how often we need to get these vaccinations.
So there's the possibility that this may be it's almost similar to the vaccinations that we have to take when it is that we go to our doctors on a consistent basis. Um, okay, that's good to know. So when does a world become somewhat normalized based upon the number of people that have taken the vaccine, based upon the what are we looking for to say, okay, like we're good, let's kind of begin to open more things up, we can kind of function without mask and things of that nature.
Yeah. So there's no specific number, but we're looking at about a 70 to 80% vaccination rate to really get that herd immunity, where you have so many people vaccinated that even if you had somebody with COVID, there's not the ability to transmit it like it is now. We're not there yet, but that's why education sessions like this and really talking truth to what this is and what we're looking to do is so important, because it does take time to kind of get that world herd immunity. um, the good thing is that they've started to make some of those recommendations as they have seen how these vaccines work. And we now know that if you get vaccinated, the chances of you transmitting that virus to somebody else is really low. And so now, if you're fully vaccinated, you can visit with other fully vaccinated family members. You can do other things. If they just came out the recommendation that you can be outside without a mask. And so as we get more people vaccinated, as they see how well the vaccines work, more of those recommendations will come out.
So do you see, this is a personal question, do you see it becoming problematic with people who are not vaccinated, who's saying that they're vaccinated, out with no mask, just doing their thing, because they're not into the vaccination? Because there's so many people who are afraid of the vaccination, who feel like the vaccination may not even be worth taking, who's afraid of the vaccination. And so they may just be in a state where it's just like, I'm going to make it appear as if I have the vaccination. So is there any fear or anything in place for that?
Yeah, because they are at a higher risk of contracting the virus and giving the virus. And if you have multiple people who are in that state, because you just don't know, they can transmit that virus to each other. I mean, it's not just about you; it's also about who you're visiting. And so, if you have elderly parents and you're going to visit them, you could transmit the vaccine if you're not vaccinated. And so part of this is thinking about it from a Christian standpoint of what you are doing, what you're giving back, and caring for the community, doing your part. You talked about
Yeah.
that earlier on. We all have to do our part to help the greater good.
Hmm. Good. Thank you. We kind of touched on it a little earlier, and it's okay. They disagree with the vaccine, and that's fine.
Hmm.
And so we're here to kind of have discussions about it, and it's not a debate. But I do just want to read this, and then I just allow you to speak to it.
Yeah.
It says, unfortunately, the average vaccine takes 6+ years to develop. How can a vaccine be created in less than 6 months? So that was spoken to, which really intrigued me as well. And so basically, what she said in that reference is that these vaccines have been studied for some time, even prior to COVID. And with it being studied, one of the main reasons why they were able to kind of move as quickly, it was because of the funding that was put behind finding a vaccine and finding regiments to kind of help um, what was happening, people dying. And so there were, just as if they were putting money into our pockets for stimulus and to businesses. They also was putting money into research to make sure and to ensure, so to speak, these things would be effective.
Yeah, and so I think about let's talk about the Connect Center, right? um it can take years to develop something like this if you are doing one grant at a time and trying to get the money from this place and money from this place, but you're still working your other job because you don't have the funds to do this. But if somebody came in and said, you know what, we're going to give you all the money that you need. You could spend 100% of your time just doing this, and we'll keep giving you money to make it successful. It is much quicker to develop, right? You can get off the ground so much quicker.
Yeah. And then the rest of their statement is, what's crazier is how our government waited months before they told us about COVID. I'm sorry, it's all intentional, bigger agenda. It was just the beginning. It was just the beginning, my opinion. I will not be getting the vaccine. Additionally, the CDC are only required to disclose and pool the vaccine or any other drug until after so many side effects or deaths.
So it's really that the CDC is part of it, but it's the FDA who does really the controlling. Um, and if you think about the J&J vaccine, it was a really small number. When they first started looking at it, they pulled it after you had 6 cases of blood clots, and they had already given over 8 million. So that's less than 1 per million, which is a tiny, tiny number. And so after they stopped it, they saw that there were more cases, there were about 15 total cases, still out of 8 million vaccines.
Yeah.
Really, really, really small amounts. And so there, it does not take much for them to say, hold on, let's wait and look at this. I think they have a lower threshold with this vaccine just because of the public eye than they do with a lot of other foods, or things like cigarettes. How long did it take for them to put that warning label on a pack of cigarettes?
Yeah, that's good. That's good. And I think, again, guys, this is to challenge our own thinking and our understanding why it is that we think that the way that we think. And I also would use the context of technology.
Mhm.
The context of technology, allows us to do things much quicker and much faster than the typical time frame.
Mhm.
You know, we have machines and we have just devices that allows things to happen much just faster. And so with that, it's the reality that our former way of thinking um oftentimes kind of leads us into a fearful place of like that just can't be, it can't happen that way. And so it's like, well, if we have and many people have said, I'm sure you've heard like all the questions and all of these different dynamics, but it's like, okay, so if we have so quick found a cure, so to speak, or a vaccination for COVID, well, why haven't we found one for cancer?
Right.
Why haven't we found one for this disease or this happening? So what would you respond to that?
So I would say there is a vaccine for cancer, right? And so one of them is the cervical cancer. You know, it took many years, but now they've figured out the virus that causes cervical cancer, and there's a vaccine. I know that there's a lot of controversy about that, but that's the only one that we have. Um, Cancer becomes very difficult because it's your own cells multiplying against itself. So how do you develop, your a recognition of your own cells without affecting your whole body versus viruses are much easier because it's foreign to your body,
Okay.
right? And so that vaccine, continues to, or the studies of all diseases continue to happen, and there's been a lot of success. Think about, HIV, that was killing people rapidly. They discovered one drug and then they discovered multiple more. And now we're at a space that there are patients, persons living with HIV for a long time where that wasn't the case before. And so this is nothing new in medicine that we discover treatments, that we have novel diseases that exist that we develop treatments for, and over time we continue to develop more treatments and better the technology, better the skills that we're able to fight diseases with.
So are they using the vaccine and are they using vaccines in our community as and we're the guinea pigs for these vaccines?
Yeah, so it's this is nationwide. Like we're not just targeting one community. This is the whole world is in this study of trying to prevent death. And
Hmm.
that's any treatment that we give, the whole world is a continuous study. If even if you take over the counter Motrin, if you have a side effect that's significant, that gets reported back to the FDA, and they looked at it and they keep all that so they can start putting out warning signs. And so everything that is out there has this safety mechanism behind it. Even the foods we eat, right? So I,
Right.
I think, driving cars, the self-driving cars that are around, we're in that
Absolutely. Yeah.
experiment too, right? I think that is the world that we live in. As we move and advance, it's this constant learning lab.
Yeah. So just a few more questions and we're gonna kind of shut it down. And so if you have any questions as it relates to the vaccine and any of those things, please drop the questions. And so we on Saturday we have Moderna,
Hmm.
and that is what we are distributing for our clinic. What kind of side effects should people be concerned about with Moderna specifically?
Yeah. And so anytime you get any type of vaccine, you can always have a local reaction, irritation of your arm, soreness of your arm. Some people just, especially if they have been exposed or had COVID, because their body kind of recognizes. And so what the mRNA vaccine is doing is it's giving a copy of the COVID vaccine and introducing that to your body so that your body makes an immune response. So if you already had COVID or exposed to COVID, already recognizes that. And so as you get that vaccine a second, say, hey, I know this, I know how to fight this, and you're going to have more of a response. Now, just because you don't have a response doesn't mean it's not working, because His body works differently. You know your body better than anybody else. Some people feel a little bit fatigued or sluggish, as you know, like think of it as your body. When you get a cold, it's building the immune system and trying to fight off the cold. And sometimes you just feel drowsy or a little. It's the same thing can happen with the vaccine when you get a vaccine. Some people have had headaches, and then again, that's just another immune response. And so those are mainly the side effects that people can get. The second time you get the vaccine, it's the same idea. Your body's being re-exposed, so most people will have a little bit stronger reaction, but everybody is different and everybody responds differently to all types of illnesses. So they're going to respond differently to vaccines as well.
So, do you recommend if someone just recently had COVID for them to get a vaccine? Because I know there was some information about, well, if you just recently had it, you really don't, you can wait about 2 to 3 months, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
to get the vaccine
Yeah.
because you're basically immune, so
Mm-hmm.
to speak. So, is that factual? And what should one do that just recently had COVID?
Yeah, if you just had COVID, the recommendation is that you wait at least 4 weeks, but most people are waiting about 90 days before you get vaccinated.
Okay. So you had that about 90 days if you that's the recommendation. And why? Like why it sounds like because of the fight, so to speak, that you kind of mentioned of it recognizing. And so with it recognizing, like what happens with.
Yeah, I mean, again, your body has already had these antibodies built up, and you're reintroducing. And so, one, you're protected, and so why get the vaccine again in that short period if you're protected, but also to reduce the amount of side effects that somebody may have.
Awesome. Awesome. So it doesn't seem like there's any more questions, and so we're about to just wrap it up. And so if you have any additional questions, you could, send them to me, and I can very easily kind of just send it over to Dr. Conti. But I just want to let you know that once again, we are having a vaccination here on site. We are on Saturday, May 1st, from 10 a.m. to, I believe it's slated to be 12. We have people, members in the community that have signed up. And so we are excited that, number one, I think the excitement is for those that are interested in that, wants it, it's accessible to them. And for our organization, one of our desires is to make resources accessible to the community.
Yeah.
And that's very important. And so, number one, thank you so much for doing your part and, connecting to other organizations to make the vaccine available. And so, I'm appreciative of that, not to discourage or not to say those of you that are taking the vaccine, like, okay, we understand that you may have fears and you may have concerns, but there are some people who really knows and feels that it's beneficial.
Right.
And so whatever your conviction may be, we're blessed that we're able to offer those opportunities. And so
Right.
we're thankful for that. So if you're interested, um, you please, we have a number that we'll drop. We'll drop the flyer. You can go to my Facebook page. You can go to the organization's page, This Generation Connect, if you haven't already liked. Um, and that information will be available. We have another meeting tomorrow to confirm the number of people that have signed. And we're so grateful because we had a meeting yesterday talking numbers, and the numbers have enlarged themselves greatly. And so I'm just blessed and I'm happy to be able to offer this as a community. I want us not to be afraid. I want us to not look at it as a myth and look at it as mystical, but also to know that there is experts such as Dr. Conti and others who are around us that have knowledge, and it's necessary sometimes to just sit and to listen to help us to rethink. Even there were a few takeaways that I have. I took a few notes, but even the idea of the funding aspect, like putting that in perspective, that literally there are a lot of projects that are happening right now, but because there's not a lot of attention on it, there's no one's really kind of investing or making any contributions. It's kind of almost like the stock market, right?
Mhm.
So because COVID and this vaccine was at a all-time high, and on a positive note, wanting to prevent more deaths, there were people who were able to kind of invest heavily into this, and so um, just really having faith and confidence in God. And for those of us that are believers,
Mhm.
we put our trust in God, and we trust that this is another means to allow us to go back to loving and gathering again and being with friends and family, because those things have hurt hurt us emotionally
Yes.
and mentally and
Mhm.
psychologically. People haven't seen loved ones for so long, and we just want to do our part, knowing not only is the vaccine, are you really helping yourself, but you're actually helping us collectively as a collective response to being safe.
Mhm.
I
Yes.
really just believe like we're all doing our part. And so, regardless if you decide to get the vaccine or not, we love you. And so, we're going to end it with Dr. Conti. I want you to just be able to speak to the people and speak to the viewers, and whatever lasting comments or remarks or encouragement or information you feel is relevant to share. And then we're just going to be out.
Yeah. So again, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity, and thank you for listening. So I can't end without saying giving a shout out to my parent organization, which is UPMC, because that is allowing me to partner with communities and to get the vaccine into our communities versus having our communities go to them. And I think that access piece is so important, and the investment they have had in ensuring that we are getting the word out. Just it really makes me proud. Um, this is not an easy thing, and I know just vaccines in general can be issues of controversy and some discussion points. And what I would say is, for everybody out there, if you are interested in having the vaccine, there is absolutely places that you can go to get it. And if you are really skeptical, continue to talk, continue to ask those questions, and talk to you, and just ask the question, if not now, then when? And what will it take to get you interested in getting the vaccine, and then working towards getting the information. I think so, not power, and we have to know the decisions behind things. And so it's so important for us not to just say no and leave it at that, but say, okay, no, but let me question what my no is, and then trying to find out more information so that you can continue to educate yourself and can continue to think about what it is that you are or not going to do with your body to keep yourself safe.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Conti, thank you so much for giving us your time. Thank you so much for giving back to the community your wisdom and your expertise. We're so blessed that you would just really just take the time and to answer questions and to inform us. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Conti, for allowing her to be away. But everyone, listen, we appreciate you so much for tuning in. If you have any questions, if you have any thoughts, just any conversation, you know how to find us. You can reach us on our YouTube. You can go back and replay this. We're going to drop some of the information for Saturday there. We're also going to do some other nearby clinics as well, because what is most important to me is not the fact that you one of the important factors is the fact that this is becoming accessible in our communities. And so we're not wanting to have the highest number of people come to the Connect Center, where it's a blessing if you desire to come to the Connect Center to get it. But we want you to know that it is accessible in whatever community, and it has been accessible in Braddock. They just recently did one there at the Greater Valley, which was a phenomenal turnout. They have done some in the neighboring Mont Valley communities. And so we just want to do our part and begin to make resources accessible to the community, so that we don't have the excuse that we're always the ones that is left out and that we're the least. And so thank you. So we're going to end it for tonight. Thank you so much for tuning in. Next Thursday, I want you to tune in. We're going to have a great discussion. We're preparing for Mother's Day. Mother's Day is coming up, and so we're gonna have some wonderful discussion around motherhood. And so, if you have those questions, and if you just want some insight and just sit and listen to wisdom, we want you to just tune in. All right, but big shout out to our team. Good shout out to our team. We have the young ones that's behind the camera. I always want to kind of just shout them out. They have done a phenomenal job. They continue to do a phenomenal job for us. So much love to them. But we're out of here. You guys have a good. God bless.